My name is Henry, but tonight's letter isn't about me. It's about a man who reached out with a story that could belong to any father, any grandfather, any soul who has poured a lifetime into their family only to feel shut out when it mattered most. He wrote me because he didn't know where else to put the weight of his grief. And as I read his words, I realized he wasn't just writing for himself. He was writing for all of us who have ever questioned what family really means when table grows cold. So tonight, I'll share his letter with you, as if it were my own voice. Because sometimes the only way to honor pain is to give it breath. And before I go on, if you've ever found meaning in these letters, if they remind you of the fragile threads that bind us together, go ahead and subscribe. It helps me keep telling stories like this, stories that might sound a little too close to your own. Now, let me begin. It was November when it happened. The air was already sharp, the kind of cold that settles into your bones and makes you grateful for every warm room you enter. For 63 years, I'd sat at my family's Thanksgiving table, first as a boy, then as a husband, then as a father, and finally as a grandfather. That table was where life happened. Births announced, jobs celebrated, tears shed over losses, and laughter so loud it made the windows shake. But that year I wasn't invited. The phone call came on a Tuesday. My daughter's voice was clipped businesslike. She said plans had changed, that Thanksgiving would be smaller this year, that they had decided it would be just immediate family. The words hung heavy, each one a knife. I wanted to ask her, what am I, if not immediate family? But the words wouldn't come. I simply nodded into the silence, though she couldn't see me, and said I understood. I didn't. The house felt bigger than ever that week. Too big. Rooms that once held the chaos of cousins and the smell of turkey now held only the echo of my footsteps. I tried to tell myself it was just one holiday, that maybe next year will be different. But in my heart, something cracked. And that's when the calls began, one after another, 63 times in total. My daughter, my son-in-law, even my grandchildren. Each time the phone rang, I hoped it was an apology, an invitation, a recognition of the place I'd earned in that family. But it wasn't. Each call was the same. Requests, reminders, needs, money for a bill, help with a car, a signature on a paper. They wanted pieces of me, but not my presence. It took me years to build what I have. Decades of hard work, of waking before dawn and coming home after dark. And I never minded giving. That's what fathers do. That's what grandfathers do. But as those calls piled up one after another, the truth became impossible to ignore. I wasn't family. I was a wallet with a last name. So I made a choice, one they'll only understand when I'm no longer here to explain it. I changed my will, not out of spite, not out of vengeance, but out of love for myself, for the dignity I refuse to let them take. And maybe, just maybe, so they'll finally understand that family isn't measured in favors granted or checks signed. Family is measured in the chairs we pull up to the table, in the hands we reach for when the world feels too heavy. That Thanksgiving, I sat alone, but I wasn't broken. For the first time in a long time, I was clear. This is my letter, my truth, my reminder that sometimes the hardest decisions we make are the ones that protect what little peace we have left. I didn't grow up with much, but we always had Thanksgiving. That day was sacred in my mother's house. Music on the radio, cousins running through the kitchen, my father at the head of the table with his hand on the carving knife, like a preacher opening a Bible. When I married Eleanor, we kept the same ritual. Different house, same heart. Her sweet potato pie, my slow-roasted turkey, chairs borrowed from the neighbors because there were always more people than places to sit. Years stack up. Traditions deepen. The table gets longer. Children marry. New names are added to the prayer. And before you know it, you're the old one who knows where the extra tablecloths are kept and which platter belonged to your grandmother. You stop being the center and become the roots, and that's fine, better than fine. It means the tree you planted took hold. Maybe that's why the call hurt the way it did. Because roots aren't supposed to be told they're not immediate anymore. It was a Tuesday 11 days before Thanksgiving when my daughter, let's call her Melissa, rang. No small talk. No, how are you, Dad? She sounded like she was reading from a memo. Dad, listen, we're keeping Thanksgiving small this year, she said. Just immediate family. It's been hectic with the kids, and, well, Tyler's parents are coming, and the house only fits so many. We'll drop you a plate. Though, I'll make sure you get pie. I said, uh-huh. That's all I could manage. There's just a lot going on, she added, like a patch to a tear that was never going to hold. We'll make it up to you. Promise. I don't remember hanging up. I do remember the quiet after, the kind that isn't peaceful. It had weight to it. I stood there with the phone in my hand, and an old ache rose up in my chest. Eleanor's picture was on the counter in a silver frame. I picked it up and set it face down because I couldn't bear the idea of her seeing me like that. Surprised, discarded, foolish. I've lived long enough to know there's always a reason. Sometimes the reason is honest. Sometimes the reason is we chose something else. Either way, it cuts the same. The next day, the calls began. Not to invite me, not to check on me. Calls for other things. The kind that say, you're still useful, without ever saying, you're still wanted. Dad, the minivan needs new tires before the drive to Tyler's folks. You think you could help? Melissa asked. I said yes. Of course I said yes. It felt like muscle memory. I've been saying yes since she was born. An hour later. Hey, Pop, it's Tyler. Weird question. Our gas bill's high this month. You mind spotting us till Friday? He chuckled like we were buddies sharing a joke. I said yes again. My voice didn't have the strength to do anything else. That night, I took out one of those long yellow legal pads I keep in the drawer, the kind Eleanor used to tease me about. You and your lists? She'd laugh, tapping the page with her spoon. It comforted me to write, to make sense of messy life with neat lines. At the top I printed, from the Tuesday call. Then I drew a single tally mark. 2 more calls on Thursday. Grandpa, our tablet cracked. The teacher says, I need one for homework. Mom said to ask you. My oldest granddaughter said, sweet as sugar and completely unaware she was being used as an errand runner for grown-up shame. I ordered the tablet before dinner. Another tally. Then a late-night text from Melissa. Love you. Can use Zelle $120? Tyler got turned around with the checking account, and it's a whole thing. Another mark. I kept the pad on the counter next to the coffee. I didn't plan to. I just never put it away. Maybe I wanted to see the truth in ink. Maybe I was afraid I'd pretend this wasn't happening if I didn't hold it up to the light every morning. On Friday, I did the grocery run like I always do. Milk, bread, apples, the kind of orange marmalade I'm the only one left alive to eat. I stood in the aisle and picked up a jar of cranberry relish out of habit. We never served the canned stuff. Eleanor had a recipe from her mother with orange zest and a little clove. I stared at the jar like it was an old friend I didn't know how to talk to anymore. After a long minute, I put it back. Some traditions shouldn't be dressed up to play pretend. That afternoon, Melissa called again, this time with a voice I recognized, light breezy, the daddy's girl tone. Oh, almost forgot. Can you print the turkey place cards you made last year? The ones with the little leaves? If you could drop them at our porch by Wednesday. I felt something cold move through me. She wanted my handwriting at a table I wasn't allowed to sit at. Sure, I said, and folded myself into the smallest version of a yes I've ever given. That night I pulled out the old box where Eleanor kept craft supplies. Twine, a punch that makes maple leaf confetti, heavy ivory cardstock. I cut each card by hand and wrote the names of my best script. Tyler's dad, Tyler's mom, Melissa, Evan, Ava, Grace. I hesitated at Grace. She's the youngest, and she still reaches for my hand when we cross a street. My eyes blurred and the name wavered. I added one more card and tucked it at the bottom of the stack. I didn't label it. Let them wonder whether there was a seat for someone they forgot. Saturday morning brought 3 more calls. The preschool fundraiser, Grandpa, they're selling pies, the soccer dues, only if you can dad, and an urgent Venmo request with no explanation. I marked each one. 7 tallies in 5 days. No invite. Not even a, how are you holding up? Here's the part one don't expect everyone to understand. I wasn't angry yet. Not the clear, hot kind of angry. I was hollow. There's a point where disappointment stops making noise and becomes a quiet that lives in your bones. I went through my routines like a man underwater, made the bed, watered Eleanor's geraniums, fixed a loose hinge on the back gate. Each small task was a prayer. Lord, let me not become bitter, because bitterness is a thief, and I've had enough stolen. On Sunday, church. Same pew, same hymn, same old men with the same old jokes at the coffee urn afterward. I didn't tell them. I didn't trust my voice to get through it, without cracking into something I couldn't put back together. I shook hands. I nodded. I drove home slowly like the world had been sandpapered down. There was a message on my machine. Melissa again, chirpier than she'd been all week. Hey, quick thing. Tyler just realized our car registration expired. The DMV site is a mess. Could you do it online for us and we'll pay you back? Also, you make the best gravy. Any chance you could drop some by in a thermos? The kids will only eat yours. I stood there with my keys in my hand, and I realized I had become a service. On-call grandfather, available for tasks, payments, and recipes. My presence had been deemed optional. My labor had not. I picked up the yellow pad and turned to a fresh page. At the top I wrote, what they ask for when I'm not invited. Below it, I drew a box and wrote 1 to 63, an empty ladder waiting to be climbed. I didn't know yet that I'd fill every rung. I only knew that a measure was needed, and I was the only one willing to take it. That evening I packed the place cards into a neat stack, tied with Eleanor's twine, and drove them to Melissa's porch. The house was glowing, lamps on, shadows moving behind curtains, and for a moment I let myself picture the table, the laughter, the clatter of plates. I set the stack down gently, like you set down a sleeping child. Then I slid the extra blank card into my coat pocket and walked back to my car with the slow dignity of a man leaving a room where he is no longer welcome. On the way home, I stopped at the grocery again and bought the cranberry relish after all. Not because I needed it, but because I didn't want a part of me that still believed in Thanksgiving to go hungry. That night, I opened my ledger, took a breath, and made another mark. The yellow pad lived on the counter, like a guest I hadn't invited, but couldn't send home. Every morning I'd make coffee, look at the tally marks, and feel that familiar little twist in my stomach. 7 lines by Sunday night. I told myself it wasn't about the number. It was about the shape of the week, the way every request arrived dressed as urgency and left nothing but silence behind it. On Monday, Mrs. Alvarez from next door caught me at the mailbox. You coming to your daughter's for Thanksgiving this year, Mr. Ellis? She asked, cheerful as ever. She had a pie tin in one hand and a stack of coupons in the other. I opened my mouth to say yes and found the word wouldn't form. I'll be here, I said instead. Quiet year. She tilted her head, saw more than I wanted her to. You know we always said an extra place, she said softly. You don't need an invitation to knock on my door. I thanked her. I meant it. But I wasn't ready to belong to someone else's table out of pity. I wanted my own table to remember me. By noon, 2 more calls. Melissa again. Dad, do you still have that big cooler? We need to brine the turkey. And then Tyler. Hey, Pop, any chance you could swing by and look at the garage outlet? It keeps tripping. I stare at the phone, let it buzz through 1 ring, 2, 3. On the 4th, habit 1. I answered. Said yes to both. Wrote 2 more marks. That evening I tried to test a boundary I kept swearing I would set. Before I bring cooler, I said, could I stop in for a minute? I won't stay. I just want to see the kids. Silence. Then a practice brightness. Oh, this week is chaos, Dad. You know how it is. Dance practice, school projects, Tyler's folks coming early. Another time, okay? Another time. I hung up and ran a finger down the tally marks, counting like they might add up to an answer. 10. 10 asks. Not 1 invitation. I pulled a chair to the kitchen window and watched the last of the leaves let go. My reflection in the glass looked like a man partway between choices. I tried to make peace with the idea that maybe I had done something to earn this distance. I searched my memory like a detective. Maybe it was Easter, when I told Evan put his phone away during grace. Maybe it was a fall game when I corrected Grace's soccer coach for snapping at her. Melissa said I embarrassed her. Or maybe it was quieter than that. 1,000 small moments where I was old when they wanted to be easy. The phone lit up on the counter. Can you send the gravy recipe? The one with the roux? I took a picture of Eleanor's index card and sent it. Before I could put the card back in the tin, another message arrived. Actually, could you just make it? You know it never tastes like yours. I heard Eleanor laugh in my head. You do make the best gravy, Henry. I wrote another tally and set a pot on the stove. Tuesday morning I gave myself a rule. I would wait an hour before answering any request. Not to punish anyone. Just to see if the world would end if I wasn't immediate. It didn't. The world carried on. Within that hour, I made my bed, swept the porch, and sat at the table with a pen. I drew 3 columns beneath the heading what they ask for when I'm not invited. Money, tasks, recipes / things only Dad can do. Beneath each, I began to list the requests. Tires, gas bill, tablet, registration, place cards, gravy, cooler, outlet. The page looked like a grocery list for a life I no longer got to live. At lunch, Melissa sent a photo, an Instagram story forwarded by mistake, maybe or on purpose without thinking. The place cards I'd written were laid out on her runner, little maple leaf confetti sprinkled just so. The caption read, "Last-minute hero. Dad's handwriting to the rescue." A small warmth moved through me. She still saw value in something I could give. Then the warmth cooled to ash. My name would be on the table, while I ate alone. I typed deleted, typed again. Looks nice. Could I bring the girls a small gift when I dropped the gravy? She didn't answer for 3 hours. When she did, it was a thumbs-up emoji. I stared at the cartoon hand, like it had spoken a language I couldn't understand. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I got up, made tea, and pulled the old file box from the closet, the one where I keep papers I don't like to look at. Insurance renewals, the deed, Eleanor's hospice discharge instructions I can't make myself throw away. At the bottom, my will. I hadn't opened it since I last updated it, after Eleanor passed. My name on the first page looked steadier than I felt. I didn't read it. I just set it on the table, face down, a paper promise that I could still shape something in this world if I needed to. Wednesday brought a different kind of call. Grandpa. Ava's voice small. Mom says you're bringing the gravy. Can you also bring the big ladle? The shiny one? The plastic one is yucky. I smiled despite myself. Of course, honey. Are you coming in when you drop it off? She asked. I opened my mouth and closed it. I won't stay, I said, but I'll wave. Big wave. Through the glass. Okay, she said, and I could hear confusion in her breath. See you, Grandpa. When she hung up, I put a mark in the task column and a half mark in the 4th column I hadn't drawn yet. Heart. I added the column. I knew it would fill the fastest. By afternoon, the list reached 17. I made myself answer one request with a no to see if I could survive it. Tyler called about firewood. His supplier fell through. I can't this time, I said. The pause on his end lasted a full 3 seconds, long enough to hear the shape of his surprise. Ah, he said, and then, no worries, Pop. We'll figure it out. He hung up without a thank you. The no didn't kill me. It didn't even bruise me. It felt like a man testing a knee after surgery and finding a holds. At dusk, I drove to Melissa's and placed the gravy on the porch in a thermos Eleanor used to take to church suppers. The house inside was bright and warm. Laughter reached the door, muffled by the storm window. I stood there longer than I meant to, ladle in a paper bag at my feet, and saw my reflection in the glass. I lifted a hand in the wave I'd promised Ava. It felt foolish, tender, and necessary all at once. On the way back, I turned off the radio and let the road noise be my company. The whisper that had lived in me all week, "Something is wrong," grew clearer, braver. It wasn't ordering me to rage. It was asking me to name what hurt, not being poor, not being busy, not even being excluded. It was being useful, but not welcome. It was being asked for everything except a chair. At home, I set the thermos lid on the counter, rinsed the ladle, and dried it with the care you give old things that have served you well. I wrote 2 more marks and drew a line under the day. Then I flipped my will over and ran a finger along the edge of the paper, like a man reading Braille. I wasn't ready to change anything yet, but for the first time I knew I could. And that knowing, quiet, steady, patient, felt like the beginning of a different kind of Thanksgiving. The one where a man decides he'll stop begging for scraps at a table he built with his own hands. The yellow pad didn't lie, and neither did the small ache behind my ribs that showed up every time the phone lit my kitchen like a lighthouse. By midweek, the tallies had started to look like fence posts. Straight, even, keeping someone out. I told myself they were only numbers, but numbers have a habit of telling the parts of the story you'd rather skip. When you add them up, they don't ask your permission. I tried to be fair. Maybe immediate family really meant fewer chairs, fewer plates, fewer arguments. Maybe the house truly couldn't hold another voice, even one that knew the blessing by heart. So I did what an honest man does when he's not sure if he's being unreasonable. I looked for evidence that would prove me wrong. I wanted to find it. Lord knows I want to be the one who'd misread the map. Evidence came, but not the kind I had prayed for. It arrived the way truth always arrives in modern life, through a glowing rectangle and the thoughtless confidence of people who assume the person they're talking about won't see what they post. Melissa had forwarded me a photo of the girls in their school play costumes. Sweet little pumpkins with felt leaves on their heads. I smiled, saved it, sent back a heart. A few minutes later, another ping landed. An Instagram story, probably meant for someone else, the kind of thing people toss into the world like confetti. The dining room. My daughter's table dressed to the nines. 12 place settings. Napkins folded like sails. And in the center, my place cards, my handwriting, standing proudly at each plate like sentries. I pinched the screen and counted. 12. Then I counted again because sometimes the mind refuses to accept what the eyes deliver. 12, not including a high chair. I recognized names in the blur. Tyler's parents, his sister and her boyfriend, a couple from their church group, the neighbors who lend tools but never return them on time. Just immediate family, she had said, and maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I remember when family included the man who paid for half the plates on that table. I put down the phone and picked up the index card tin where Eleanor kept her recipes. I needed an anchor. Under gravy, holiday, her handwriting curved across the card like a hand on my shoulder. Low heat. Patience. Don't rush the simmer. Taste before you add more salt. I traced each line with my finger and felt the steadiness return. Then the phone rang again. Dad. Quick one, Melissa said without preamble. Could you Venmo Tyler for the folding chairs? We had to rent extra. The card keeps declining because of the deposit. My first thought was unkind. You rented extra chairs for just immediate family. I swallowed it. You can't put words back once they've left your mouth, and I wasn't ready to start a fire I couldn't put out. How many? I asked, because sometimes numbers are the only way to keep a conversation from floating off into feelings. 8, she said, and then, like a courtesy ribbon on a bruise, you're a lifesaver. I sent the money and wrote 2 lines on the yellow pad, one in money, one in tasks. Then I drew a small arrow in the margin and wrote, 8 chairs, 12 plates. Immediate. It felt petty to write it, but pettiness isn't the same as precision. Precision is the thing that lets you look at yourself in the mirror and say, you didn't imagine this. That evening, I pulled out the photo albums. Not the digital kind, the real ones. Cloth covers, cracked plastic sleeves, the smell of ink and time. I found a spread from Thanksgivings past. There was the year Tyler first came. Standing a little too straight in a new sweater, balancing a casserole dish like it might explode. There was the year we borrowed sawhorses and set a door on top to make a second table for the kids. There was Melissa, 8 years old, watching her mother baste a turkey, as if Eleanor were performing a sacrament. In every picture, I could spot something small that proved what mattered. A hand on a shoulder, an apron looped around a waist, a chair pulled a little closer to make room for a late arrival. No one counted plates in those years. We counted heads and made it work. Another ping. This time not a photo, an accidental voicemail. The kind your pocket makes when it's too close to the truth. Voices in the background, clinks and laughter. my name bobbing up like driftwood. Tyler's voice casual, as if explaining a policy. He lingers when he drops stuff off. It's just easier if he doesn't come in. Less guilt, you know? Then Melissa's whisper, sharper than I've ever heard it. Just keep him happy this week. After the holidays, we'll talk. I set the phone down carefully, as if it might break. The room around me sharpened and blurred at once, a strange trick of grief. Through the window, Mrs. Alvarez carried a pie across her yard and looked up like she could feel my house holding its breath. I pretended not to see her and turned back to the albums. The past is safer when the present has teeth. The next morning, I took the yellow pad to the dining room and set it where my plate would have been had I been invited. I made a new page and gave a hard title, What They Need versus What I Need. Under what they need, I copied the list from earlier, money, tasks, recipes, errands. Under what I need, I wrote, slowly, like a child practicing letters, a chair, a hello, a question that isn't a request, a place to bring my stories where they won't feel like burdens. It felt foolish and holy at the same time to see those needs in ink. We don't write down our needs as we get older. We tuck them under competence and call it dignity. But dignity without clarity is just quiet despair. By noon, 3 more asks. I answered one, delayed one, and denied one. The denial was small. I can't drive Tyler pick up the deep fryer. My back is bad today. And true. His reply was a single word. Copy, no problem. No thanks. Just a transaction closed. I circled exchange on the pad and drew a box around it labeled how they talk, when I'm useful versus when I'm not. Boxes help. They turn fog into something you can point at. That afternoon, I drove past Melissa's to drop off the thermos lid I'd forgotten. I didn't knock. I told myself I would leave it and go. As I walked up the path, the door opened a few inches and Grace darted out, slipping past Tyler's leg like a fish through reeds. "Grandpa!" she squealed. Behind her, a voice. Tyler's mother, I think, stage whispered, "Is that him? Don't invite him in." Grace barreled into my legs, and I scooped her up before the moment could turn into a scene. "Back inside, sweet pea," Tyler said, appearing in the gap, smiling too big. Grandpa was just leaving. He wasn't cruel. He was efficient. It stung more than cruelty would have. On the drive home, the whisper inside me finally spoke in a full sentence. "You're being managed, not cared for, not considered. Managed, like a budget line, like a calendar reminder, like a liability that must be kept calm at the lowest possible cost." The words landed with a dull thud in my chest, and something old and stubborn in me stood up. That evening I set the yellow pad beside my wheel. I poured tea, then changed my mind and poured whiskey. I am not a man given to grand gestures. I prefer screws tightened to speeches delivered. But there are moments when a life asks you to say something out loud. If not to the people who won't hear it, then to yourself. I put my hand flat on the wheel and said into the quiet kitchen, I am not a delivery service. I am not a bank. I am a man who built a table. I slept well for the first time that week. Not because anything outside had softened. Tomorrow would still bring requests, and the day after that, but because inside had settled. Clarity doesn't change other people. It changes the way you allow them to treat you. In the morning, before the coffee finished dripping, I added one more line to what I need, to be remembered on purpose, not out of convenience. Then I turned a page and drew a new heading in block letters I hadn't used since I was a boy. Terms. I didn't write anything beneath it yet. Terms require patience. Eleanor's card had taught me that. Low heat. Don't rush. Taste before you add more. But for the first time since the Tuesday call, I knew there would be terms, and they would be mine. By Thursday, the tally marks had grown so dense they looked like prison bars. 23 asks, not one invitation. The pad sat on the counter like a silent witness, and every time the phone buzzed, I felt less like a father and more like a switch they could flip when they needed light. That morning, Melissa called again. Her tone was brisk, efficient, like she was dialing into a meeting. "Dad, can you pick up extra whipped cream on your way over? Tyler's folks insist on it, and we're short." I let the silence stretch. Then I said, "I won't be bringing anything else, Melissa." A pause. "What?" Why not? It's just whipped cream. Because, I said slowly, I've given enough this week without being given a chair at the table. She exhaled, sharp. Dad, please don't make this harder. We're juggling so much already. We just need your help. Melissa, I said, steady as stone, what you need is my presence, not my errands. And if I can have one, you won't have the other. Her voice hardened. That's not fair. No, I answered. What's not fair is being treated like an employee when I'm your father. The line went quiet for a beat. Then came the quick, professional tone again. Fine, we'll figure out. She hung up before I could reply. I set the phone down and poured my coffee. My hands trembled, but not from age, from release. A no, spoken aloud, has a strange weight. It's heavy for a moment, then lighter than air. That evening, Tyler called. His voice carried that practiced chumminess I'd learned to distrust. Pop, I hear you're upset. Look, Thanksgiving is complicated. We've got limited space. Obligations to my parents, you know how it goes. Obligations, I repeated. And what am I? A convenience. Come on, he said, laugh tight around the edges. You're taking this too personally. I let that hang. I'm your wife's father. If I'm not personal, then what is? He sighed, frustrated. Melissa's in tears. Do you really want to ruin the holiday over a seat at the table? Something in me snapped, not in rage, but in clarity. Tyler, I built that table. I paid for the roof over your heads more times than I can count. And now I'm being told I'm not immediate enough to sit at it? If Melissa's in tears, it's because she knows what she's doing isn't right. He started to reply, but I cut him off. Don't call me for money again this week. Don't call me for errands. If I'm not family enough to share the meal, I'm not family enough to subsidize it. The line went dead. I didn't need to check to know he'd hung up. Men like Tyler don't like hearing the truth without an invoice attached. For the first time all week, the phone stayed silent that night. No buzzing, no reminders, no sudden urgent needs. Just the quiet of a house that had drawn a line. I slept deeper than I had in months. Friday morning, Melissa came by. No call, no warning. Just her car pulling into the drive. I opened the door to see her standing there, arms crossed, eyes red. She looked like the little girl who used to stomp her foot when she didn't get ice cream. Except now the stakes were heavier. Dad, she said, you're punishing me. No, I replied. I'm teaching you. There's a difference. She stepped inside, her voice rising. Do you know how embarrassed I was when Tyler's parents heard you weren't invited? They think it's because you're difficult. They think I didn't ask because you caused drama. I stared at her. And what did you tell them? Her silence was the answer. Shame flickered across her face. I've been called many things in my life, I said softly. But difficult? For wanting a chair at my own daughter's table? That's a first. Tears welled in her eyes. Why can't you just let this go? It's one meal. One meal, I echoed, that I've spent 63 years showing up for. One meal that tells me where I stand in this family. If it's just one meal, why does it cost you so much to let me in? She had no reply, only tears and the quiet sound of her trying to breathe through them. I wanted to reach for her, to hold her, but something in me knew this moment wasn't about comfort. It was about truth. Comfort can come later. Truth has to land first. Melissa, I said gently, you've turned me into a service, into someone you call for tasks, for money, for recipes, but not for love, not for presence. And I won't keep feeding that arrangement. Her jaw tightened. So what now? You're cutting me off. I'm cutting off the illusion, I said. The illusion that you can have my labor without my company. The illusion that I'll accept being erased while still holding everything together. No more. She shook her head, backing toward the door. You'll regret this, Dad. Maybe, I admitted, but at least I'll regret it with dignity. She left without another word. The sound of her car pulling away was both an ending and a beginning. That night, I took out my will again. I hadn't changed it yet, but I opened it this time, read the lines, traced the names. And for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine what it would mean to rewrite them, Not out of spite, out of balance, out of truth. The tally marks had stopped at 23. But the real count was higher, written not in ink but in the deep grooves of my heart. And those are the marks that never fade. The house was quiet after Melissa left. Too quiet. It was a kind of silence that doesn't soothe. It presses. I walked from room to room that evening like a man searching for something he couldn't name. Every chair, every picture frame, every shadow reminded me of how empty the word family can feel when it's stripped of presence and filled with conditions. The phone didn't ring that night, nor the next morning. For days it stayed still on the counter, a black slab of silence. And in that silence I found both relief and sorrow. Relief that the constant asking had stopped. Sorrow that it took refusal to earn peace. On the third day, a message appeared. Melissa again. Short, cold. The kids are confused. They don't understand why you're angry. Please don't drag them into this. I stared at the words for a long time. Angry? I wasn't angry, I was wounded. But in her eyes, my refusal to keep serving without question looked like anger. People often call it anger when you stop being convenient. I didn't reply. There was nothing I could say that wouldn't sound like proof of her accusation. The next day, Tyler called. His voice carried no warmth. Look, Pop, I don't know what you're trying to prove, but you're hurting Melissa. The kids keep asking why Grandpa won't come. You really want them to think you don't care. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so backwards. Tyler, I said quietly, do they know who told me not to come? Silence on his end. A shuffle, then a sharp sigh. It was complicated. You wouldn't understand. I understand more than you think, I said. I understand that you wanted my gravy, my place cards, my money, but not me. And children aren't confused, Tyler. They see more than you give them credit for. He muttered something about stubborn old men and hung up. That night, I pulled the photo of Grace and Ava from a fridge door. Their school picture, both missing teeth, both smiling wide enough to remind me of what hope used to feel like. I held the photo and whispered, I'll never stop loving you, even if your parents decide to forget I belong. The following Sunday, I walked into church alone. As I slid into my usual pew, Mrs. Alvarez gave me a knowing look. Did you spend Thanksgiving with family? She asked after the service, kindly, as though she already knew the answer. I spent it with memories, I said, and she patted my hand. That week, the silence from Melissa stretched longer. Then, another message, this one sharp as glass. If you're going to hold the will over our heads, just tell us. Tyler thinks that's your real game here. I closed my eyes. So they had guessed. Not guess everything. I hadn't changed it yet. But they felt the shift in me, the way a storm makes the air taste different before the clouds break. For years, I had given without ledger, paid bills, fixed cars, sat through recitals and soccer games, clapping louder than anyone. I never tallied it. But the moment I picked up that yellow pad, I started to see what my generosity looked like through their eyes. Obligation without gratitude. Utility without love. And now, the moment I set a boundary, they named it manipulation. I wanted to write back, no, the will isn't leverage. It's clarity. It's me deciding who I am when I'm gone, since you won't let me be who I am while I'm here. But I didn't send it. I'd learned something that week. Explanations don't change hearts already made up. Instead, I sat with the will open on my desk, pen in hand. The names looked back at me, Melissa's, the grandchildren's, written in steady ink from years ago. My hand hovered. Not yet, I told myself. Not yet. A will shouldn't be changed in anger. It should be changed in truth. And I wasn't finished gathering mine. A few days later, Ava called me herself. Her voice was small, hesitant. Grandpa, why didn't you come for turkey? Mommy said you were busy. My throat tightened. I forced my voice steady. I wanted to, sweetheart. But sometimes grown-ups make decisions that don't make sense to children. Just know this. I love you. Always. She giggled at something in the background, then whispered, I love you too. The line clicked as someone, Melissa, I imagined, took the phone from her. The call ended. I sat at the kitchen table long after, staring at the blank place card I'd kept in my pocket that night. I slid it across the table toward me and wrote one word, me. That empty card, that nameless space, had always been mine, and I was done pretending otherwise. The fallout wasn't shouting or slammed doors. It was quieter, colder. It was being painted as selfish for the crime of wanting inclusion. It was being recast as difficult for refusing to be invisible. And yet beneath the ache, a strange strength grew. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. And once you claim your own worth, you can't keep trading it for scraps. The tally marks had stopped. The silence had grown. But inside me, the whisper had become a voice. And that voice said, "You still hold the pen. You still hold the power. And you will not leave this world remembered as a man who bought his place with gravy and rent checks." The fallout had begun, but so had my resolve. The silence stretched into weeks. The phone that once rang daily now sat still, as if it too had grown tired of the arrangement. No more requests, no more reminders, just emptiness where need used to be. At first, the quiet felt like punishment. Then it felt like proof. Proof that without my yes, I wasn't worth the effort of a hello. One afternoon, I found myself standing at Eleanor's grave. The grass was still damp from morning rain, and the sky above was the color of pewter. I brushed the leaf from her name and whispered, "Did we raise them wrong? Did we teach them to take without teaching them to give?" The wind moved through the trees, carrying no answer. Maybe that was the answer. On the drive home, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. Clarity demands action, and mine had arrived like a final notice. I pulled the will from my desk drawer that night. This time, I didn't just hold it. I read it line by line. My handwriting was steady, firm, from years ago. The name stared back at me, weighted with promises I'd made in better days. Promises I believe would be honored with love. But promises without love are just chains. I laid the document flat and wrote a single word across the margin in pencil. Change. The next morning, I called Martin, my lawyer. He's been drawing up papers for me since I was a young man. Mortgages, insurance. The first draft of this very will. "Martin," I said, my voice steady, "I need to make updates." He didn't ask why. He just said, "Come in tomorrow morning. Bring the current draft." That night, I hardly slept. Not out of doubt, but out of remembering. My mind sifted through 63 years of Thanksgivings. Eleanor setting the table, Melissa sneaking olives before dinner, the grandchildren's laughter when they spilled cranberry sauce across the cloth. The memories were sweet and bitter at once, like marmalade on burnt toast. Morning came. I put on my best coat, the one Eleanor always said made me look dignified, and I drove downtown. Martin greeted me with the same calm he always carried. We sat across from each other at his oak desk, and he slid a new sheet of paper toward me. "Tell me what you like changed." I told him everything. The names that would remain. The names that would be removed. The charities I'd admired from afar, but never had the courage to support until now. He wrote carefully, line by line, turning my words into law. At one point, he looked up and said, "Henry, are you sure? This is no small step." I nodded. I'm as sure as I've ever been of anything. Love should be given freely. Not bought, not traded, and certainly not begged for. When the draft was finished, I signed my name at the bottom. My hand didn't tremble. It felt like the first firm line I'd drawn in years. Driving home, I felt lighter. Not happy, no, the wound was still raw, but lighter, like a man who had finally set down a burden he'd carried too long. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, the yellow pad beside me. I flipped to a new page and wrote, "Final tally, 63 asks, 0 chairs." Underneath, I drew a line and added, "No more." I poured a glass of Eleanor's favorite wine and sat across from me, as if she were still there. "It's done," I whispered. They may never understand why, but I do, and that has to be enough. The house was still. The air was cool. For the first time since the Tuesday call, I didn't feel managed. I felt free. I didn't change my will out of vengeance. I need you to hear that. Too many people believe boundaries are punishment. They're not. They are truth, written in ink instead of whispers. When I signed the new papers at Martin's desk, I felt no anger. What I felt was release. For years, I had tied myself to the hope that family would see me as more than the tasks I performed, the bills I paid, the recipes I carried from Eleanor's hands to theirs. Signing didn't erase the ache, but it reminded me that I was still a man who could choose how he was remembered. And isn't that all any of us want in the end? To be remembered for who we are, not for what we provided? That Thanksgiving will always be the one I wasn't invited to, the one where my place card sat on the table, without my chair behind it. I could waste the rest of my life circling that wound like a dog at a locked door, or I could step back, breathe, and decide what comes next. I chose the second. The days after the change felt different. The house was still quiet, yes, but it was no longer the silence of exile. It was the silence of space. Space to read again, to play the old records Eleanor loved, to sip coffee on the porch without watching the phone like a hungry man waits for bread. I began to write letters. Not to Melissa, not to Tyler, but to my grandchildren. Letters they might not read for years. Maybe not until they're old enough to understand that family isn't measured in gifts or chores, but in presence. I wrote to Ave about the time she painted a turkey handprint on construction paper and called it art. I wrote to Grace about the way she held my hand at the farmer's market when she was afraid of the crowd. I told them, you are loved, not for what you ask, not for what you achieve, simply because you are mine. And I sealed those letters, dated them, placed them in a box beside the new will. Someday when I am gone, they will see both the law and the love. And perhaps then they'll understand why the law had to change. Life has taught me something I wish I'd known sooner. People will take as much as you let them, not because they're evil, but because need is loud and gratitude is quiet. If you don't draw the line, they will assume the line doesn't exist. For 63 calls, I said yes. And every yes erased me a little more. When I finally said no, I found myself again. I don't know if Melissa will forgive me. I don't know if Tyler will ever understand. But forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation, and understanding is not the same as respect. I can live without reconciliation. I can even live without understanding. What I cannot live without is respect, especially the respect I owe myself. I used to believe family was unbreakable, that blood was enough to guarantee belonging. But I've lived long enough to see that family can fracture. Sometimes it fractures quietly, like ice splitting under the weight of footsteps. One moment it looks solid. The next, you're falling through. What saves you isn't clinging to the broken sheet. What saves you is learning how to swim. If you've listened this far, maybe you know what I'm talking about. Maybe you've sat at a table where your body was present, but your soul wasn't welcome. Maybe you picked up the phone, hoping for a "how are you?" and received only another "can you?" Maybe you've been told you were difficult, selfish, ungrateful, for the crime of wanting to be seen, not just used. If that's you, let me tell you this. You are not wrong for wanting more. You are not wrong for drawing the line. You are not wrong for demanding a chair at the table you helped build. On my desk sits the blank place card I once slipped into my pocket. I keep it there not as a wound, but as a reminder that every man and woman deserves a seat with their name on it, written in love, not obligation. I never labeled that card before, but last week I did. I wrote one word across it in bold, steady letters, me. Because if I don't claim that seat for myself, no one else will. To anyone listening tonight, I'll leave you with this truth. Love is not proven by how many tasks someone can do for you. Love is proven by how many times they choose to sit beside you without needing anything in return. So invite your father. Invite your mother. Invite the friend who always shows up but is never thanked. Don't let their names live only on the place cards you display for others to admire. Pull up the chair. Make space. Because someday when the table is emptier than you like, you will realize that presence, not tasks, not checks, not favors, was a true feast all along. And once it's gone, you can't serve it again. That was his letter. I read it now because it could have been mine. It could be yours. It belongs to every soul who has ever felt uninvited from the table they helped build. So tonight, as I fold this page and place it with the others, I leave you with this. Protect your dignity. Protect your seat. And when someone tells you there's no room for you, remember, you still hold the pen. You can still write your own name.